Now, most people fell into one of two categories during the pandemic: the working from home comfort eater or the get fit quick opportunist. After years of Epicureanism, a badly broken ankle and a 6-month ride on the EU's gravy train, I admit I was a bit of a unit when I left my post as an MEP. Yet having been plunged into relative inactivity, I actually homed in on a new project and began researching lifestyle medicine and nutrition. What I had always feared would be nigh on impossible and deeply dull drudgery actually became the greatest change of habits I have ever made, and a wonderfully rewarding experience. Far from nibbling on muesli and thrashing away on the stepmaster, I discovered that simply by eating fresh produce mindfully and walking with purpose, the stones shed. Although, dear viewer, I admit I ditched the carbs and haven't looked back since, and I still try to walk the 5 kilometres to work every day to tot up those 10,000 steps. But what I thought would actually be major changes really weren't. And I slept better, I felt happier, and I'm back in that dress I kept to one side for 15 years in the hope that one day I could squeeze into it again. I am now sincerely of the belief that if I can do it, so can anyone, including my septuagenarian mother, who in following the same programme lost 2 stone and came off blood pressure medicine, with her latest health MOT showing no need for statins or any other pharmaceutical fix-its. With the government now looking into a range of options from prescribed exercise, rewards for buying healthy groceries, calorie-counting apps and movement targets, can we, as a nation, all beat the bulge? Now, sticking around with us to chat about this is Dr Aseem Malhotra, friend of the show and my guru, in fact, because it was actually Aseem who got me healthy and got my mother healthy. Now, I could talk to anybody and bore them to death about the changes I made, but explain how you came about discovering your diet, the Pioppi diet, and why it has such good effects.
Yeah, so Pioppi itself is a village in southern Italy, and myself and my co-author of the book, Donal O'Neill, who is a former international athlete, we went to this village because it's known to be like one of the blue zones. People live very long and very healthy lives. So we wanted to look at the way that these people lived, what they ate, and how do we link that to modern research when it comes to not just obesity, but the diseases linked to obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, for example. So that's where the origins of Pioppi diet came. But for me, the research I'd done on nutrition, that's something that evolved after I qualified as a doctor, because most doctors don't get taught anything about nutrition in medical school. That's a topic for another time. Is that I came to the conclusion, Alex, that the obesity problem, first and foremost, is environmentally driven. Because up until sort of 1970, 1980, there was almost no obesity in the Western world. And suddenly it started to increase. So question, what happened in the environment to trigger that increase in obesity? Did we all suddenly become irresponsible? Did we all suddenly become lazy? Did we all suddenly become gluttons? No, it's what I have determined, I think most people in the nutritional research area know now, is that the obesity epidemic is primarily driven by eating foods that encourage overconsumption. So those foods really are the ones that don't give you good nutrition, so you don't feel full, keep you hungry. To some degree now, I think there's research emerging that some of these foods are addictive, especially the sugary foods and the starchy foods. And that really is the essence of what has driven the obesity epidemic. So I think when it comes to the individual, and something you've obviously experienced and your mum has as well, it's focusing on eating nutritious food first and foremost, ideally home-cooked, minimally processed foods, cutting out the snacks. And actually, if you do that, then your body gets the nutrients it needs and your appetite gets controlled and you're not fighting hunger. I mean, I also had to experience this myself because I was the guy, in my late teens, early 20s, was consuming a lot of sugar, 40 teaspoons of sugar a day I calculated in different foods. And I was always hungry and I thought that was normal. I'd have my breakfast in the morning, probably Weetabix with, 3 teaspoons of sugar. I'm starving by sort of 10:30 and then I'm off to whatever, have a hot chocolate or whatever else and a snack, a packet of crisps. And then I'm hungry again at lunchtime. And this was something that I got used to. And when I cut out the ultra-processed foods and the sugary stuff, I found that actually I wasn't hungry anymore and I was able to control my appetite. So really, that's really the essence of what we should be thinking about when it comes to obesity on an individual level, eat real food. Now, the problem we've got in this country, Alex, and many Western countries now, is that ultra-processed food has become the dominant food product that we consume. What does that mean? It's usually foods that are high in starch, unhealthy oils, sugar, packaged foods, additives and preservatives, usually 5 or more ingredients. That's 50% of the diet of the average diet of the Brit is these sorts of foods now. So what do we do to combat it? Well, we educate people. Of course we need to educate them. But I think what people need to understand is most of our food choices are kind of automatic. They're made without full conscious awareness. You know, we all know when if you go past a bakery and you smell, I don't know, freshly baked bread or say donuts, it will trigger something that is going to make us more likely to eat those foods. And actually the food environment is so saturated with these ultra-processed foods, it becomes difficult to avoid. I draw comparisons with tobacco. If you go back to, think about it now, go back to 1960, 1970, 50% of adults were smoking. Now that sounds shocking now, doesn't it? 50% of adults. How do we curb tobacco consumption? It was focusing on the availability, the affordability, and the acceptability of cigarettes. So public health education campaigns for the acceptability, affordability, taxing, raising the price, had a big drop in consumption when we raised the price of cigarettes. And then the availability, so public smoking bans, for example, banning tobacco advertising, sports associations with tobacco. That was commonplace when I was growing up. So if we apply the same principles to ultra-processed food on a population level, we'll have a huge impact, and then it becomes easier to exercise personal responsibility. But for now, it's very difficult for most people to exercise personal responsibility because they often lack the knowledge. The choice is, sometimes often very limited in terms of what they can eat. Hospital food, 75% of the food purchased in hospitals is essentially junk food. It's crazy, isn't it? And you've got 50% of NHS employees. These are people who you would think are very disciplined. Doctors, we are generally very disciplined. To go through medical school and do the kind of work we do, you have to be very disciplined. So it can't be personal responsibility. 50% of NHS doctors are overweight or obese as well. It's an environmental problem.
And so what do you think the government should be doing about this? Because every time there's discussion about the sort of policies being rolled out, people are split with it's nanny state, I should be able to eat what I want, when I want. It's not for the government to put sin taxes on things. That'll only be passed down to the consumer. And then there seems to be sort of firing off guns in different directions and suggesting all sorts of things. If you had Boris Johnson's ear right now and you said, come on, Boris, you said yourself that you almost kicked the bucket due to your weight.
Yeah.
This is what you should do.
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. So I used to be part of the London Food Board many years ago when Boris Johnson was mayor, and I was advisor to them. So Rosie Boycott, who was the chair at the time, we had discussions, and that information was fed through to Boris. During the COVID pandemic, Matt Hancock contacted me because I made the link between obesity and COVID deaths and got a lot of publicity around it to ask me about what they should do. And I told Matt, I said that ultra-processed foods are the issue. It's an environmental problem. You do need some regulation of the food industry, just like you did tobacco, for this to have an effect on the population. Unless that is done, Alex, and we haven't done that really effectively, I think one of the best things this government has done, to be honest, from a public health perspective, is a sugary drinks tax. So they brought that in, okay? That's really good, but we need to go further. We need to tax foods that are high in sugar, and we need to actually, I think, will be better to tax ultra-processed foods. And it will shift everything. It will shift what people purchase. It will. We have to make healthy foods more affordable. We have to think about, as you mentioned earlier, about takeaways around, for example, schools. There's been calls from medical leadership in the past that we should actually not allow fast food outlets to be, for these businesses to function within a, say, 2-mile radius of schools. So there's actually quite a lot of things that need to be done. But it comes back to the same thing again and again and again. Food and environment.